Real estate stories. Okay, here's a good one. So a few years ago, I get a call from a gentleman who said he had an investment property he wanted to, or was thinking of selling, and his name was also Brian. Little spelled, a little different than mine, and he wanted to meet at a coffee shop in Bell's Corners, a little burb outside of Ottawa. And so I met Brian on the day, went in to see him, and interesting guy. And must have passed. I think it was an interview. Must have passed the interview because he invited me to the property, which is a few blocks away, also in Bell's Corners. So I went on to see this little town that he had bought. And the tenant, I think, had been there for about 10 years, and the tenant had just moved out, and he was thinking now he's going to sell it as opposed to re-tenant it. He was in later in his years, and he was sort of getting out of the investment game, I guess. And so now the house is a little beat up. I think the tenant had been there for 10 years. So I suggested to Brian also that he repaint the property, and no problem. He was going to have his painter come in. They were going to wash all the walls down and paint the place. And so we signed up the listing that day. And he said, yes, once it's repainted, you give me a call. I could send in the photographers and things, and we were going to move forward on the listing. So maybe a week and a half goes by, get the call. I go over to the property. I walk in the door with him, and I was absolutely blown away in a very bad way. They'd painted it robin's egg blue. I'm talking about every wall, including the bathrooms, were exactly the same color of robin's egg blue. I'm talking about more bluer, that weird turquoisey, weird blue that of robin's egg. Not my favorite color on a wall, but every wall. And I was like, oh my God, you've got to repaint this. And he got really upset, as you can imagine. It turns out his painter was colorblind. No kidding. And he told his painter just to paint it cheaply, do what you got to do. And the painter apparently had used the wrong paint or didn't know what paint that he was using. And I was like, oh, and he was upset at me, at the painter. And I calmed down the situation. Listen, I will pay to have it repainted on my nickel. Send in the same guy, but I will choose the paint color. and from that day on, I've always chosen the same paint color, or not the same paint color, but the paint, or make sure it's known. And usually an off-white or a white or something along those lines goes way better than a robin's egg blue. Now, the good news of the story is that the colorblind painter repainted it, did a really nice job. We got the home sold. And then he told me that he had about 7 or 8 more of these. And so we went on to sell each and every one of these properties over the course of 3 or 4 years. As the tenants moved out, I was blessed with getting the opportunity to sell them. And we went on to sell each and every one of them. And on one of the last ones that we sold, I get a call from him, and I know he'd closed literally the day before on this last property, and he wanted to come over to my place. And I thought, oh, whatever, maybe he wants a coffee again. I got quite close to Brian, and he shows up in a brand spanking new Porsche. He'd literally just picked it up that day. Now, he was paying on average about $50,000 to $60,000 for these little towns, and now I was selling them for in the $270,000, $300K range. So he did quite well equity-wise. But he had an old Buick LeSabre. You'd never know this guy had any real money at all, and I guess he really didn't need the money. There was 100% equity in these homes, so he'd taken his 250 or 270 or along those lines. He went right over to Mark Motors and bought a brand spanking new Porsche. And I was the first to see it. He was so happy that he'd gone, it's not my old Buick. Cool thing is he kept the Buick because he said, I'm going to drive it on rainy days. And he'd spent the money on this brand new Porsche. So 2 interesting parts to this in terms of this real estate story. 3 maybe. I always make sure my clients understand the proper paint colors, either me or my stager. Secondarily, maybe don't hire a colorblind painter. And the third thing is that, buying and holding real estate in the long term obviously paid off. It paid off for Brian and his family, and in many cases it paid off for me as well. Anyways, real estate stories.